It's another one of those nights, isn't it? The kind where your mind refuses to settle, where you're scrolling through videos at 2:47 a.m. looking for something that will finally make sense of the cosmic breadcrumbs you've been collecting like a spiritual archaeologist with trust issues. Tonight we're diving into dangerous territory, the realm where your desperate need for signs meets your terror of being ignored by the universe itself. Synchronicity shadow work, and that embarrassing moment when you realize you've been asking the wrong questions for years. You know that feeling when you see 11:11 on the clock for the 7th time this week and wonder if the universe is trying to tell you something, or if you're just developing an unhealthy relationship with digital timepieces. Tonight, we explore both possibilities and why the answer might be more unsettling than you think. Forget everything you've heard about manifesting your reality. Your subconscious has been doing that without your permission since childhood, and frankly, it has questionable taste in plot twists. You say you're open to receiving divine guidance, but panic every time life doesn't unfold according to your carefully curated vision board. We're about to deconstruct why your relationship with synchronicity feels more like waiting for a text from someone who's clearly not that into you. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world, and how many of us are avoiding sleep by diving into the mysteries of consciousness. Adjust your volume, dim your lights, and prepare to question whether you've been interpreting the universe's messages correctly, or if you've been reading your own psychological patterns like tea leaves in a cosmic cafe. You're no longer in your bedroom. You're inside the mind of someone who thinks every coincidence is a conversation with the divine, and every silence is a personal rejection. The good news, synchronicity is real, and it's been trying to reach you. The bad news, you've been answering the wrong phone and it's about to hang up. This script is for those of you who are exhausted from chasing signs like a spiritual detective who's lost the case file. For those who've turned synchronicity into a performance metric for your worthiness in the eyes of an invisible audience. For those who've been treating the universe like a cosmic vending machine that's perpetually out of order, leaving you standing there with your prayers like crumpled dollar bills that won't be accepted. Carl Jung once said, "Synchronicity is an ever-present reality for those who have eyes to see." But what he didn't mention is how to develop those eyes when yours are clouded with desperation, how to hear the whispers when your mind is screaming for answers, or how to trust the process when the process seems to have forgotten your address. The truth about synchronicity isn't what the spiritual marketplace has been selling you. It's not about alignment and attraction vision boards and positive thinking. It's about becoming so authentically yourself that reality has no choice but to rearrange itself around your frequency. It's about understanding that you are not separate from the field of consciousness. You are the field experiencing itself subjectively, and every synchronicity is simply you having a conversation with your own deeper knowing. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. Most of what you think are synchronicities are actually your psyche, trying to wake you up from the dream of separation. They're not confirmations that you're on the right path. They're course corrections, nudging you toward a more honest relationship with your own soul. The universe isn't dropping breadcrumbs to lead you to your desires. It's leaving clues to help you find your way back to yourself. Tonight we're going to explore why synchronicity disappears when you need it most, why the signs you receive aren't always the ones you want, and why the silence between the messages might be the most important part of the conversation. We're going to look at how your relationship with synchronicity reflects your relationship with uncertainty, with trust, with the terrifying possibility that you might actually be supported by something larger than your own understanding. There's a particular kind of spiritual exhaustion that comes from constantly scanning your environment for signs. It's the fatigue of living on high alert, of treating every license plate, every overheard conversation, every random song on the radio as a potential message from the cosmos. You've turned yourself into a walking antenna, desperate to receive transmission from somewhere, anywhere, that might tell you you're not alone in this bewildering experience of being human. But here's what Jung understood about the nature of the unconscious. It speaks only when the conscious mind stops demanding answers. Synchronicity emerges from the space between your thoughts, in the pause between your questions and your frantic attempts to answer them yourself. It's not attracted by your intensity, it's revealed by your surrender. Think about the last truly meaningful synchronicity you experienced. Chances are it happened when you weren't looking for it. You were probably distracted, maybe even feeling hopeless about ever receiving guidance again. Your mind had given up its vigilant watch, and in that moment of surrender, reality shifted just enough to show you something impossible. Something that made you remember that you're part of a larger story than the one you've been telling yourself. This is the paradox of synchronicity. It requires the very thing that desperation destroys: trust. Not trust that things will work out the way you want them to, but trust that they're already working out in ways you can't yet understand. It's the difference between demanding that the universe prove its love for you and being so secure in that love that you don't need constant proof. The mystics have always known this. They called it the dark night of the soul, that period where all external guidance seems to vanish, where the heavens appear to close, where you're left alone with nothing but your own faith in something you can neither see nor prove. But what they also knew is that this apparent abandonment is actually an initiation. The silence isn't punishment, it's preparation. It's your consciousness learning to trust its own knowing, to develop the internal compass that will guide you when all external reference points disappear. Your desperate need for synchronicity is actually what repels it. Like trying to catch your own shadow or pin down a dream, the harder you chase it, the more elusive it becomes. This isn't because the universe is playing hard to get. It's because synchronicity is a function of coherence and desperation is its opposite. When you're frantically seeking signs, your energy is scattered, fragmented, reaching in all directions at once. But synchronicity requires a different quality of attention, receptive, rather than grasping, open rather than demanding. This is why the most profound synchronicities often come during periods of letting go. When you've finally stopped trying to force life to make sense, when you've released your grip on outcomes and timelines, when you've made peace with not knowing, that's when the universe can finally get through to you. Not because it was absent before, but because you've finally created the space for it to be heard. There's a technique that the ancient shamans understood intuitively, the art of creating sacred emptiness. They would fast not just from food, but from thoughts, from desires, from the constant chatter of the mind that drowns out subtler communications. They understood that receiving guidance requires becoming an empty vessel, that the cup must be empty before it can be filled. In practical terms, this means learning to sit with uncertainty without immediately rushing to fill it with meaning. It means being comfortable with the space between questions and answers, with the pause between asking and receiving. It means trusting that the silence isn't empty. It's pregnant with possibilities that haven't yet found their form. Consider the metaphor of the echo in a canyon. The echo only comes back to you after your voice has finished reverberating, after the sound has had time to travel and return. If you're constantly talking, constantly calling out, you'll never hear the response. The echo needs silence to exist. So does synchronicity. This is perhaps why so many people report experiencing powerful synchronicities during times of crisis or loss. It's not that suffering attracts divine attention, it's that suffering often forces us to release our illusions of control. When your carefully constructed plans fall apart, when your usual strategies for managing life prove inadequate, you're left with no choice but to trust something beyond your own understanding. And in that space of forced surrender, synchronicity can finally reach you. But you don't have to wait for crisis to access this state. You can cultivate it deliberately. The practice is deceptively simple. Learn to be comfortable with not knowing. When you catch yourself desperately seeking signs, pause, breathe. Ask yourself what would happen if no sign came. Can you be okay with that? Can you trust that your life is unfolding perfectly, even without cosmic confirmation? Can you love yourself enough to stop demanding proof of your worthiness from the universe? This isn't about becoming passive or giving up on your dreams. It's about shifting from demanding that life conform to your expectations to becoming curious about what life is actually offering you. It's about recognizing that synchronicity isn't a service that exists for your convenience. It's an expression of the fundamental interconnectedness of all things, and you're not separate from it. You are it experiencing itself through the lens of your particular consciousness. The silence that manifests synchronicity isn't empty, it's full of potential. It's the pause between the notes that makes music possible, the space between words that gives them meaning, the darkness between stars that makes their light visible. When you stop filling every moment with seeking, you create space for finding. When you stop talking long enough to listen, you realize the conversation was always happening. You just couldn't hear it over the noise of your own desperation. Here's an uncomfortable truth about synchronicity that the spiritual self-help industry doesn't want you to know. The universe isn't in the business of making you feel good about your choices. Those signs you've been collecting like cosmic participation trophies, half of them aren't congratulating you. They're trying to stage an intervention. Jung understood this better than most. He recognized that synchronicity is the language of the unconscious, and the unconscious doesn't share your ego's agenda. While your conscious mind is busy constructing narratives about how special and chosen you are, your deeper self is dropping hints about the shadow work you've been avoiding, the patterns you need to break the uncomfortable truths you've been dancing around like a spiritual game of hot potato. This is why synchronicity can feel so frustratingly cryptic. You're looking for clear confirmation that you're on the right path, and instead you get symbols that seem to point toward everything you've been trying to avoid. You ask for a sign about whether to stay in your relationship, and suddenly you're seeing references to independence and self-reliance everywhere. You pray for guidance about your career, and the universe starts sending you messages about courage and authenticity, which would be encouraging if your current job didn't require you to compromise both on a daily basis. The mistake most people make is assuming that synchronicity exists to validate their conscious desires. They treat it like a cosmic GPS system designed to navigate them toward their preferred destinations. But synchronicity isn't interested in your preferences. It's interested in your evolution. It's not trying to give you what you want. It's trying to show you what you need to see. This is where Jung's concept of the shadow becomes crucial. The shadow is everything you've rejected about yourself, all the qualities and impulses and truths that don't fit your self-image. Most people spend enormous amounts of energy trying to maintain their persona, the mask they wear to be acceptable to themselves and others. But the unconscious sees through this performance, and synchronicity often serves as its way of holding up a mirror to show you what you're refusing to acknowledge. Those negative synchronicities you've been dismissing, the ones that seem to contradict your positive affirmations and vision boards, they're not mistakes in the system, they're features. They're your psyche's way of trying to integrate the parts of yourself you've been disowning, the aspects of your experience you've been labeling as bad or wrong or not spiritual enough. For example, you might be someone who prides yourself on being generous and giving, always putting others' needs before your own. You've built your identity around being the helper, the caregiver, the one people can count on. But then you start noticing synchronicities related to boundaries, to saying no to self-preservation. Your immediate reaction might be to dismiss these signs. After all, they seem to contradict everything you believe about being a good person. But what if they're actually trying to help you reclaim the parts of yourself you've been sacrificing on the altar of others' comfort? Or perhaps you've constructed an identity around being rational and logical, someone who has their life together, who doesn't need anyone else's help. But the synchronicities you're receiving seem to be pointing toward vulnerability, toward asking for support, toward acknowledging that you don't have all the answers. Again, your ego might resist these messages because they threaten your carefully maintained image of independence. But your soul might be trying to guide you toward a more authentic relationship with your own humanity. This is the difference between ego-based spirituality and shadow-integrated wisdom. Ego-based spirituality uses synchronicity as a way to confirm its own righteousness, to prove that it's special and chosen and on the right path. Shadow-integrated wisdom recognizes that the most powerful synchronicities often come disguised as inconvenient truths, as invitations to grow in directions that the ego finds threatening. Jung wrote extensively about the compensatory function of the unconscious, its tendency to balance out the one-sidedness of conscious attitudes. If you're too identified with being good, The unconscious will compensate by bringing up your capacity for healthy selfishness. If you're too attached to being in control, it will create situations that force you to surrender. If you've been avoiding your anger, it will find ways to surface that energy until you're forced to acknowledge and integrate it. This is why some of the most important synchronicities feel like cosmic slaps in the face rather than gentle encouragement. They're not trying to hurt you. They're trying to wake you up. They're pointing toward the parts of your life where you've been living in denial, where you've been settling for less than your authentic truth, where you've been playing small to avoid confronting your own power. The challenge is learning to recognize these shadow synchronicities without immediately rejecting them. It requires developing what Jung called holding the tension of opposites, the ability to sit with contradictory information without immediately resolving it into a comfortable narrative. It means being willing to consider that the universe might be showing you exactly what you need to see, even if it's not what you want to see. There's a particular kind of spiritual maturity required to welcome difficult synchronicities. It's the difference between treating the universe like a cosmic sugar daddy who exists to fulfill your wishes and recognizing it as a wise teacher who sometimes assigns homework you'd rather not do. It's the willingness to trust that even the uncomfortable signs are expressions of love, the kind of love that cares more about your growth than your comfort. This doesn't mean that every negative event in your life is a meaningful synchronicity. Sometimes a traffic jam is just a traffic jam. But it does mean being open to the possibility that the patterns you're experiencing, especially the ones that keep repeating, despite your best efforts to change them, might be trying to teach you something about the parts of yourself you haven't yet fully owned. The invisible codes of synchronicity are written in the language of wholeness, not happiness. They're designed to help you become more integrated, more authentic, more complete, even if that process is sometimes uncomfortable. The universe isn't interested in preserving your illusions, it's interested in helping you become who you truly are. And sometimes that requires showing you who you're not. Nothing quite compares to the spiritual panic that sets in when synchronicity goes silent. You've been receiving signs, feeling connected, trusting that you're being guided. And then, suddenly nothing. The universe seems to have put you on red and gone offline, leaving you standing in the middle of your life, wondering if you've done something wrong, if you've somehow fallen out of favor with the cosmic forces you thought were on your side. This is perhaps the most universally shared experience among people who work with synchronicity, the moment when the signs stop coming, usually right when you need them most. You're facing a major decision, going through a crisis, desperate for guidance, and the universe chooses that exact moment to become mysteriously uncommunicative. It's like having a best friend who's always available to chat about trivial matters, but suddenly becomes unreachable during emergencies. The first thing to understand is that this isn't personal. The disappearance of synchronicity isn't a punishment or a sign that you've been spiritually demoted. It's actually a natural part of the process, as predictable as the tides or the phases of the moon. Just as your muscles need periods of rest between workouts to grow stronger, your consciousness needs periods of apparent disconnection to develop its own inner guidance system. But knowing this intellectually doesn't make the experience any less disorienting. When you've become accustomed to external validation of your path, its absence can feel like being abandoned in a foreign country without a map or a translator. The silence where you expect signs creates a vacuum that your mind rushes to fill with worry, self-doubt, and increasingly frantic attempts to force some kind of response from the universe. This is where the neurochemistry of desperation becomes relevant. When you're in a state of urgent need, your nervous system activates what researchers call the threat detection network. Your amygdala, that ancient alarm system in your brain, starts scanning for danger with the intensity of a security guard who's had too much coffee. But here's the catch. This hypervigilant state is the antithesis of the receptive awareness required to notice subtle synchronicities. Imagine trying to hear a whispered conversation while standing next to a construction site. The noise of your anxiety, your desperation, your need for immediate answers creates so much mental static that the gentle frequency of synchronicity gets completely drowned out. It's not that the signals aren't being transmitted. It's that you're no longer tuned to the right channel to receive them. There's also the factor of what psychologists call negative priming. When you're desperately seeking signs, you inadvertently create a state of focused attention that actually makes you less likely to notice unexpected patterns. It's like looking for your keys so intently that you walk right past them 3 times. Your consciousness becomes too narrow, too goal-oriented to maintain the peripheral awareness where synchronicity likes to hide. This is why many people report that synchronicities return as soon as they stop looking for them. It's not that the universe was testing their patience, it's that their shift from seeking to allowing changed their neurological state from threat detection back to open awareness. The moment they stop trying to force a connection, they naturally return to the receptive state that makes connection possible. But there's another layer to this phenomenon that's even more important. The disappearance of synchronicity often marks the beginning of your graduation from external guidance to internal knowing. It's like spiritual training wheels being removed, uncomfortable at first, but ultimately necessary for developing your own sense of balance and direction. Jung spoke about the individuation process, the lifelong journey of becoming who you truly are. Part of this process involves developing what he called the transcendent function, the ability to hold tension between opposites without immediately resolving them into comfortable answers. The silence of synchronicity is often your psyche's way of forcing you to develop this capacity to learn to navigate uncertainty without constantly seeking external validation. This is particularly challenging in our current culture, which has turned synchronicity into another form of spiritual consumption. We've been trained to expect immediate responses, instant gratification, constant feedback. The idea of sitting with questions without immediately receiving answers triggers our cultural ADHD, our addiction to stimulation and certainty. But the deeper wisdom traditions understood that periods of not knowing are essential for growth. They called them the dark night of the soul, the desert experience, the void before creation. The practical challenge is learning to distinguish between the natural ebb and flow of synchronicity and the static created by your own desperation. One useful test is to notice what happens when you genuinely release your need for signs, not the fake spiritual bypassing kind of release where you pretend you don't care while secretly keeping one eye open for messages, but the authentic kind where you actually become okay with not knowing, at least temporarily. Often the moment you truly let go, not strategically but genuinely, the synchronicities return. This isn't because you've manipulated the universe into responding. It's because you've shifted back into the state of consciousness that naturally perceives the connections that were always there. It's like adjusting the focus on a telescope. The stars didn't suddenly appear, you just aligned your instrument properly to see them. There's also the possibility that the absence of obvious synchronicities is itself meaningful. Sometimes the universe's way of guiding you is to force you to rely on your own wisdom, to trust your own knowing, to stop seeking external validation for decisions that only you can make. The silence might be saying, you already know what you need to know. Stop looking outside yourself for answers that only you can provide. This is perhaps the most mature relationship you can have with synchronicity, recognizing it as a supplement to not a replacement for your own inner guidance. The signs are beautiful when they come, but you don't need them to live a meaningful, connected life. You are not a passive recipient of cosmic messages, you are an active participant in the dance of consciousness, and sometimes your role is to trust your own steps, even when the music seems to have stopped. The disappearance of synchronicity is often the beginning of a deeper kind of faith. Not faith in signs and confirmations, but faith in your own capacity to navigate uncertainty with grace. It's the universe's way of saying, I've shown you that. You're connected to something larger than yourself. Now it's time to embody that connection, rather than constantly seeking proof of it. Here's where most people get synchronicity completely backward. They think the universe is responding to their conscious desires, when actually it's reflecting their unconscious state of being. You're asking for signs about love while radiating, the frequency of fear praying for abundance, while embodying scarcity, seeking guidance about your purpose while being fundamentally disconnected from who you actually are, beneath all your stories and strategies, and desperate attempts to be someone else. This is the insight that Neville Goddard spent his entire career trying to communicate, often to audiences who were too busy wanting things to understand what he was actually saying. The universe doesn't respond to your words, your vision boards, your perfectly crafted affirmations. It responds to your state, the fundamental vibration of who you're being in each moment, most of which operates completely below the threshold of your conscious awareness. Think about it this way. You are constantly broadcasting a signal 24 hours a day through every cell of your body, every thought you think, every emotion you feel, every belief you hold about yourself and reality. This signal is not what you think you're sending. It's what you're actually emanating based on your deepest assumptions about life, love, safety, worthiness, possibility. And synchronicity is simply the universe's way of showing you what frequency you're actually tuned to. This is why people can spend years doing affirmations about self-love while continuing to attract relationships that mirror their deep belief that they're not truly lovable. Their conscious mind is saying, "I am worthy of love," but their unconscious state is radiating, "I need to earn love through performance," or "I'm only valuable when I'm useful to others," or "if people really knew me, they would leave." The synchronicities they experience will reflect this deeper frequency, not their surface-level intentions. The painful truth is that most of us are strangers to ourselves. We have a vague sense of what we want, but very little awareness of what we're actually embodying. We know our preferences and goals and dreams, but we're largely unconscious of our core beliefs, our fundamental assumptions about how life works, our deepest fears and wounds, and the ways they shape our every interaction with reality. This unconscious material isn't just personal psychology. It's your actual vibrational signature, the frequency you're broadcasting into the quantum field that connects all things. And the field responds not to your intentions, but to your essence. Not to what you're trying to attract, but to what you're actually aligned with in the depths of your being. This is why shadow work is so essential for anyone who wants to work consciously with synchronicity. The shadow, that part of yourself you've disowned or rejected, doesn't disappear just because you've decided to ignore it. It continues to operate in the background, influencing your choices, shaping your experiences, attracting situations that will force you to eventually deal with what you've been avoiding. For instance, you might consciously want a peaceful, harmonious life, but if you've got unintegrated anger or unresolved trauma, you'll keep finding yourself in situations that trigger these hidden aspects of yourself. The synchronicities you experience will seem to contradict your stated desires, but they're actually perfectly aligned with your unconscious need to heal and integrate these split-off parts of your psyche. This is where the work gets interesting and challenging, learning to become aware of what you're actually embodying versus what you think you're embodying. It requires developing what could be called inner honesty, the willingness to look at your actual emotional patterns, your real belief systems, your genuine relationship with concepts like trust, safety, worthiness, and love, rather than the idealized versions you'd prefer to believe. One way to discover your unconscious state is to look at the patterns in your life as if they were synchronicities. What themes keep repeating? What kind of people do you consistently attract? What situations seem to find you, no matter where you go or how much you try to avoid them? These patterns are like a mirror, reflecting back the deeper currents of your psyche that you might not even realize exist. If you consistently attract people who are emotionally unavailable, that's information about something in your unconscious that's aligned with unavailability, perhaps a fear of intimacy, a belief that you're not worthy of full presence, or an unconscious comfort with the familiar pain of longing, rather than the unknown territory of actually being met. If you keep finding yourself in situations where you feel overlooked or undervalued, that's feedback about some part of you that believes you're invisible or unimportant, regardless of how much conscious work you've done on self-esteem. This isn't about blame or shame, it's about recognition. Your unconscious patterns aren't mistakes, they're information. They're your psyche's way of showing you where the real work needs to happen beneath the level of positive thinking and conscious intention setting. They're invitations to go deeper, to become more authentic, to align your inner reality with your outer aspirations. The transformation happens when you stop trying to override your unconscious patterns with conscious desires and start getting curious about what those patterns are trying to communicate. Instead of fighting against the synchronicities that don't match your preferences, you begin to see them as guidance toward greater wholeness and authenticity. This might mean facing uncomfortable truths about yourself. It might mean acknowledging needs you've been ashamed of, desires you've been judging, fears you've been minimizing. It might mean recognizing that some of your spiritual goals have been more about avoiding your humanity than embracing it, more about escaping your shadow than integrating it. But this is where real freedom begins. Not the fantasy freedom of getting everything you want, but the authentic freedom of being who you actually are without apology or pretense. When your conscious intentions align with your unconscious state, when your outer desires match your inner embodiment, when you stop broadcasting mixed signals to the universe, that's when synchronicity becomes less random and more coherent, less frustrating and more supportive. The universe isn't withholding what you want to punish you. It's reflecting what you are to teach you. And sometimes the greatest gift it can give you is to not respond to your surface-level requests until you're ready to receive what you're actually asking for, in the depths of your being. Most people approach synchronicity like they're trying to crack a code written in a foreign language, when what they're actually encountering is their own soul attempting to have a conversation with their conscious mind. This isn't some mystical metaphor. It's a practical understanding of how the psyche communicates with itself across the boundary between conscious and unconscious awareness. Jung spent decades studying this phenomenon, recognizing that synchronicity is intimately connected to what he called the individuation process, the lifelong journey of psychological integration that leads to authentic selfhood. In this context, synchronicities aren't random, meaningful coincidences. They're breadcrumbs left by your deeper self, guidance markers on the path toward becoming who you actually are beneath all the conditioning and roles and personas you've accumulated. This is why synchronicity often feels both familiar and mysterious at the same time. It's your own wisdom speaking to you, but from a layer of consciousness you don't usually access directly. It's like receiving letters from a version of yourself that lives in a different city, recognizably yours, but carrying information from a perspective you don't normally inhabit. The individuation process is essentially about integrating the various aspects of your personality into a coherent whole. It's about bringing unconscious material into conscious awareness, not to eliminate it, but to develop a mature relationship with it. It's about moving from the fragmented experience of being multiple people in different situations to the integrated experience of being one authentic person who can respond flexibly to various circumstances. In this context, synchronicity serves as a feedback system, letting you know when you're moving in the direction of greater integration and when you're moving away from it. When you're aligned with your authentic path, not necessarily the path you think you want, but the path your soul is calling you toward, synchronicities tend to flow more easily. When you're forcing yourself into roles or situations that don't fit your true nature, synchronicity often becomes more difficult to access or interpret. This is different from the popular notion that synchronicity is about attraction or manifestation. It's not about getting what you want. It's about becoming who you are. And sometimes the process of becoming who you are requires releasing attachments to who you thought you were supposed to be, or who others have expected you to be, or who you've been trying to be to earn love and acceptance. The symbols and themes that appear in your synchronicities are often related to archetypal patterns that are relevant to your current stage of development. If you're in a phase of your life where you need to develop your inner authority, you might start noticing synchronicities related to leadership, independence, or taking responsibility. If you're being called to develop your capacity for nurturing, you might encounter symbols related to motherhood, creativity, or caring for others. These aren't instructions from an external intelligence telling you what to do. They're reflections of the developmental pressures that are already present in your psyche, trying to guide you toward the next stage of your growth. The symbols emerge from your own unconscious, but they connect to universal patterns that have guided human development for millennia. This is why the same symbolic language appears across cultures and throughout history. not because there's a cosmic directory of universal symbols, but because the human psyche shares certain structural patterns. The hero's journey, the divine feminine, the wise elder, the innocent child. These archetypal figures represent different aspects of the complete human personality, and they appear in synchronicity when those aspects are ready to be integrated. Understanding synchronicity as the language of individuation changes how you relate to it. Instead of trying to decode messages from an external source, you begin to recognize it as a conversation between different layers of your own consciousness. Instead of looking for confirmation of your current beliefs and desires, you become curious about what aspects of yourself are trying to emerge or be acknowledged. This requires developing what Jung called symbolic attitude, the ability to hold space for meaning that can't be reduced to literal interpretation. A synchronicity about water might not be telling you to take a vacation by the ocean. It might be pointing toward your need to connect with the emotional or intuitive aspects of your nature that you've been neglecting. A recurring encounter with the number 4 might not be a cosmic lottery prediction. It might be highlighting your need for more stability and structure in some area of your life. The challenge is learning to think symbolically in a culture that tends to interpret everything literally. We've been trained to look for direct cause and effect relationships, clear instructions, obvious meanings. But the language of the soul is more subtle, more poetic, more open to multiple layers of interpretation. It speaks in metaphors and images, in patterns and themes, in resonances that touch something deeper than rational understanding. This doesn't mean that synchronicity is infinitely interpretable or that any meaning you assign to it is valid. There's usually a rightness or wrongness to different interpretations that you can feel in your body, a sense of recognition when you've touched on something authentic versus the hollow feeling of forcing meaning where none exists. The key is learning to trust your intuitive knowing while remaining open to possibilities you hadn't considered. Working with synchronicity as a tool for individuation also means being willing to follow where it leads, even when that direction is different from where you thought you wanted to go. The ego has its plans and preferences, but the self, Jung's term for the deeper organizing principle of the psyche, has its own agenda, which is always oriented toward wholeness rather than happiness, integration rather than comfort. This can be unsettling, especially if you've been using spirituality as a way to improve your life circumstances rather than as a path toward authentic self-knowing. But it's also ultimately liberating because it means you don't have to figure everything out with your conscious mind. There's a deeper intelligence within you that knows the way, and synchronicity is one of the methods it uses to communicate with your everyday awareness. The goal isn't to become dependent on synchronicity, constantly looking outside yourself for guidance. The goal is to develop such a clear relationship with your own inner wisdom that synchronicity becomes a natural extension of your intuitive knowing rather than a substitute for it. It's about learning to live from the inside out, trusting the guidance that emerges from your own depth, while remaining open to the ways that guidance might be reflected back to you through the external world. There's an uncomfortable truth about modern synchronicity culture that nobody wants to acknowledge. We've turned the sacred language of the soul into a spiritual slot machine, complete with the addictive neurochemical payoffs that keep us pulling the lever long after the casino has emptied our pockets. What was once a profound method of psycho-spiritual guidance has become another form of entertainment, another way to avoid the harder work of actually integrating the wisdom that synchronicity is trying to offer. This isn't entirely our fault. We live in a dopamine-driven culture that has rewired our brains to crave constant stimulation, immediate rewards, and the next hit of novelty. Social media has trained us to seek external validation in the form of likes, comments, and shares. Dating apps have turned love into a game of infinite options and instant gratification. It was probably inevitable that we would bring this same consumption-oriented mindset to our spiritual practices, turning even the most sacred experiences into content for our personal highlight reels. The problem starts with how we've been taught to relate to synchronicity in the first place. Instead of seeing it as occasional guidance from our deeper wisdom, we've created an expectation of constant connection, perpetual signs, non-stop cosmic communication. We've become spiritual day traders, constantly checking the market for new signals measuring our worth by the frequency and intensity of our mystical experiences. This creates what neuroscientists call a variable ratio reinforcement schedule, the same mechanism that makes gambling so addictive. Sometimes you get the hit, sometimes you don't, but the unpredictability keeps you coming back for more. You start refreshing your spiritual Instagram feed, looking for the next angel number, the next meaningful coincidence, the next confirmation that you're special and chosen and connected to something larger than yourself. But here's what happens. When you turn synchronicity into entertainment, you actually destroy your capacity to receive its deeper guidance. Your nervous system becomes calibrated to seek the high of recognition rather than the subtler satisfaction of integration. You start prioritizing the excitement of receiving signs over the harder work of actually following where they lead. You become a spiritual tourist, collecting experiences rather than allowing them to transform you. The dopamine hit of recognizing a synchronicity, that moment when you see 11:11 on the clock or hear a song that seems to speak directly to your situation, becomes more important than what that recognition is supposed to facilitate. Instead of using the synchronicity as a doorway into deeper self-understanding, you use it as evidence of your cosmic significance. Instead of letting it guide you toward necessary changes, you use it to validate your current choices. Instead of allowing it to humble you with its mystery, you use it to inflate your sense of being specially chosen. This spiritual bypassing of the actual work that synchronicity is pointing toward creates a kind of arrested development. You get stuck in the recognition phase without moving into the integration phase. You become really good at spotting patterns and really bad at allowing those patterns to actually change you. You develop what could be called synchronicity literacy without developing synchronicity wisdom. The telltale signs of this dopamine trap are everywhere in spiritual communities. People who can interpret every license plate and cloud formation as a cosmic message, but can't seem to break out of the same relationship patterns that have been causing them pain for years. People who receive constant guidance about their life, purpose, but never actually take concrete steps toward manifesting that purpose. People who are so busy documenting their mystical experiences that they never have time to integrate them. There's also the performative aspect of synchronicity culture that social media has amplified. People share their meaningful coincidences, not primarily to process their meaning, but to demonstrate their spiritual sophistication, to prove that they're tuned into something the rest of us are missing. The synchronicity becomes less important than the story about the synchronicity, less valuable for its guidance than for its currency in the spiritual marketplace. This creates a particularly insidious form of spiritual materialism where you start unconsciously manufacturing synchronicities to maintain your image as someone who receives divine guidance. You begin interpreting increasingly random events as meaningful, not because they actually carry significance, but because having a steady stream of signs has become part of your identity. You become a spiritual content creator, constantly producing mystical experiences for an audience that includes yourself. The neurochemical addiction to meaningful coincidences also creates what researchers call confirmation bias on steroids. Your brain becomes so primed to find patterns that it starts creating them where none exist. You lose the ability to distinguish between genuine synchronicity and the pattern-making tendency of a mind that's been trained to seek constant stimulation. Everything becomes a sign, which means nothing is actually a sign. This is particularly dangerous because it can lead to what psychologists call magical thinking, the belief that your thoughts and feelings directly control external reality in ways that bypass natural cause and effect. Instead of understanding synchronicity as a reflection of your inner state and a guide toward greater authenticity, you start believing that you can manipulate reality through your spiritual practices. You become convinced that the universe is personally invested in your happiness and will rearrange itself to fulfill your desires if you just get the formula right. The antidote to this trap requires developing what could be called spiritual sobriety, the willingness to value truth over excitement, depth over frequency, transformation over validation. It means being willing to go through periods where synchronicities are rare or absent, without interpreting that as a sign that you've fallen out of favor with the cosmos. It means being more interested in becoming the kind of person who can live with integrity and purpose, even without constant external confirmation, than in maintaining a steady supply of mystical experiences. This doesn't mean becoming cynical about synchronicity or dismissing its genuine value. It means developing a more mature relationship with it, one that's based on quality rather than quantity, on integration rather than collection. It means being willing to sit with one meaningful synchronicity for weeks or months, allowing its implications to slowly unfold and transform your understanding, rather than immediately seeking the next hit of cosmic connection. The deepest irony of the dopamine trap is that the more desperately you seek synchronicity as entertainment, the less access you have to its genuine guidance. The seeking itself creates the inner noise that drowns out the subtle whispers of your soul. The addiction to mystical experiences actually cuts you off from the mystical dimension of ordinary life. The desperate need for signs that you're special prevents you from recognizing the ways in which your completely ordinary struggles and joys are already sacred. Real synchronicity doesn't exist to make you feel good about yourself. It exists to help you become more honest about yourself. It's not designed to confirm your specialness, it's designed to guide you toward your authenticity. It's not meant to be consumed like spiritual fast food. It's meant to be digested slowly, like medicine that takes time to heal what's actually broken rather than temporarily masking the symptoms. The test, disguised as a gift. When synchronicity challenges your assumptions. Every genuine synchronicity comes with a built-in question that most people never ask. What if this isn't what I think it is? We're so trained to interpret signs through the lens of our desires and expectations that we rarely consider the possibility that the universe might be offering us something completely different from what we're hoping to receive. We approach synchronicity like spiritual consumers, looking for cosmic confirmation of our existing beliefs, rather than remaining open to having those beliefs fundamentally challenged. This is where synchronicity reveals its true nature as a teacher rather than a servant. The most powerful synchronicities aren't the ones that tell you what you want to hear. They're the ones that force you to question what you think you know about yourself, your path, and your place in the larger scheme of things. They're not cosmic pats on the back. They're invitations to grow beyond your current limitations, which often means releasing attachments to outcomes you've been desperately seeking. Jung understood this paradoxical nature of synchronistic guidance. He recognized that the unconscious often compensates for the one-sidedness of conscious attitudes by presenting experiences that challenge those attitudes. If you're too identified with being independent, synchronicity might repeatedly bring you opportunities to practice interdependence. If you've been avoiding conflict at all costs, the universe might start orchestrating situations where you're forced to stand up for yourself. The challenge is that these compensatory synchronicities rarely feel like gifts in the moment. They feel like obstacles, complications, unwelcome disruptions to your carefully laid plans. You ask for guidance about finding your soulmate, and instead you keep encountering situations that force you to examine your patterns around intimacy and vulnerability. You pray for financial abundance, and instead you're presented with opportunities to develop a healthier relationship with money security and self-worth, opportunities that might initially look like setbacks or limitations. This is why many people report feeling tested by the universe, as if their faith and commitment are being examined before they're allowed to receive what they've been asking for. But this framing misses the deeper purpose of these challenging synchronicities. They're not tests designed to prove your worthiness. They're invitations to evolve beyond the level of consciousness that created your current problems. Consider the person who keeps attracting romantic partners who seem perfect initially, but eventually reveal themselves to be emotionally unavailable. From one perspective, this looks like bad luck or poor judgment. But from a synchronistic perspective, this pattern might be the universe's way of forcing them to examine their own relationship with availability, not just in others, but in themselves. Perhaps they're unconsciously attracted to unavailable people because they're not actually available for the kind of intimacy they claim to want. The test isn't whether they can finally attract an available partner. The test is whether they're willing to become truly available themselves, vulnerable, present, willing to be seen and known in all their imperfections. The repeated pattern of unavailable partners is actually a gift pointing them toward the inner work that needs to happen before they can create the kind of relationship they're seeking. Or consider the entrepreneur who keeps having business opportunities fall through at the last minute. They might interpret this as the universe blocking their success, as evidence that they're not meant to be prosperous. But what if these setbacks are actually protecting them from ventures that would have been successful in the short term, but ultimately unfulfilling? What if the synchronicity is guiding them away from success based on external validation toward success based on authentic expression? The challenge of these testing synchronicities is that they require you to hold a much longer-term perspective than your ego typically wants to maintain. Your immediate desires for love, success, security, recognition are real and valid, but they're often based on a limited understanding of what would actually serve your highest development. The universe seems to operate from a much broader view, one that prioritizes your growth and authenticity over your comfort and preferences. This is where trust becomes essential, not blind faith that everything will work out according to your wishes, but mature trust that you're being guided toward whatever experiences will best serve your evolution, even when those experiences challenge your assumptions about what you need or want. It's the difference between trusting the universe to give you what you ask for and trusting it to give you what you actually need, even when you're not wise enough to know the difference. The testing quality of synchronicity also reveals something important about the nature of spiritual development. It's not a straight line toward increasing happiness and ease. It's more like a spiral where you encounter the same themes and challenges at deeper and deeper levels throughout your life. Each time you think you've mastered a particular lesson, life presents you with a more sophisticated version of the same test, inviting you to integrate that wisdom at a new level of complexity. This is why people often report that synchronicity becomes more challenging as they become more spiritually aware. It's not that the universe becomes more demanding, it's that you become capable of handling more sophisticated forms of guidance. The simple encouraging synchronicities that were appropriate when you were first awakening to your connection with something larger might no longer be what you need. Instead, you might receive synchronicities that challenge you to embody your wisdom in increasingly difficult circumstances. The key to working with testing synchronicities is learning to recognize the gift within the challenge. This doesn't mean putting a positive spin on genuinely difficult experiences or pretending that everything happens for a reason in some simplistic way. It means being willing to ask, what is this experience trying to teach me? What aspect of myself? Is it asking me to develop or examine? How is it inviting me to grow beyond my current limitations? Sometimes the gift is obvious. A difficult relationship teaches you about boundaries. A career setback forces you to clarify your values. A health challenge reconnects you with what truly matters. But sometimes the gift is more subtle, revealing itself only in retrospect, as you recognize how a particular challenge prepared you for something you couldn't have imagined at the time. The testing nature of synchronicity also highlights the importance of developing what Jung called amor fati, love of fate, the ability to embrace whatever life brings as necessary for your development. This doesn't mean becoming passive or fatalistic, but it does mean releasing the need to control how your growth unfolds and trusting that even the most challenging synchronicities are expressions of a deeper intelligence that knows better than your conscious mind what you need to become who you're meant to be. Frequency, not fate. Understanding synchronicity as vibrational alignment. The most persistent misconception about synchronicity is that it's something that happens to you, a cosmic gift or message delivered from outside yourself by an external intelligence that's keeping track of your spiritual progress and responding accordingly. This way of thinking keeps you in a powerless position, waiting for the universe to decide whether you're worthy of guidance, wondering why some people seem to receive constant signs while others struggle to notice any meaningful patterns at all. But what if synchronicity isn't something that happens to you, but something you happen to be available for? What if it's not about divine favor or spiritual advancement, but about frequency, your capacity to tune into the subtle patterns and connections that are always present, but usually invisible to minds that are racing, grasping, or lost in the noise of unconscious reactivity. This shift in understanding changes everything about how you relate to synchronicity. Instead of waiting passively for signs, you begin to recognize that your state of consciousness determines what you're able to perceive. Instead of treating meaningful coincidences as rare gifts, you start to understand them as natural expressions of the interconnectedness that underlies all existence. Connections that become visible when your awareness is clear and receptive, enough to notice them. Think of consciousness as a radio receiver. The airwaves are full of signals broadcasting at different frequencies, but you only hear the station you're tuned to. When your internal state is chaotic, when you're anxious, distracted, desperately seeking, or caught in repetitive thought patterns, you're like a radio with poor reception, picking up static instead of clear signals. But when your consciousness becomes calm-centered and openly attentive, you naturally tune into the more subtle frequencies where synchronicity operates. This is why many of the practices that support spiritual development, meditation, contemplation, time in nature, creative expression, also tend to increase your awareness of synchronistic patterns. These practices don't attract synchronicity. They clear away the mental and emotional static that normally prevents you from noticing the meaningful connections that are always occurring around you. Heart coherence research has begun to provide scientific support for this understanding. Studies show that when your heart rhythm becomes coherent, when your emotional state is balanced, and your breathing is deep and regular, it affects your perception in measurable ways. People in coherent states perform better on intuition tasks, make decisions that align more closely with their values, and report feeling more connected to their environment and other people. From this perspective, synchronicity isn't a supernatural phenomenon, but a natural consequence of optimal brain-heart coherence. When your nervous system is regulated and your attention is present rather than scattered, you're able to perceive patterns and connections that were always there, but previously filtered out by a survival-oriented consciousness focused on threats and problems. This understanding also explains why synchronicity often seems to disappear during periods of stress crisis or urgent need. It's not that the universe withdraws its support when you need it most. It's that stress hormones and activation of the sympathetic nervous system literally change what your brain is able to perceive. When you're in fight-or-flight mode, your attention narrows to focus on immediate threats and opportunities. The peripheral awareness that notices meaningful coincidences and subtle patterns gets shut down in favor of tunnel vision, designed to help you survive immediate challenges. The practical implication is that cultivating synchronicity isn't about learning special techniques for attracting cosmic messages. It's about developing the inner conditions that allow you to perceive the guidance that's always available. It's about nervous system regulation, emotional coherence, present moment awareness, and what researchers call relaxed attention, a state of alert receptivity that's open to whatever arises without grasping or forcing. This doesn't mean that synchronicity is purely subjective, or that you're just projecting meaning onto random events. The connections are real, but they exist at a level of subtle information that requires a particular quality of awareness to perceive. It's like the difference between looking at a night sky from a brightly lit city versus from a dark mountaintop. The stars are always there, but you need the right conditions to see them clearly. The frequency metaphor also helps explain why different people seem to access different types of synchronicity. Someone whose consciousness is primarily oriented toward material success might notice patterns related to business opportunities and financial guidance. Someone focused on healing and service might perceive synchronicities related to helping others and finding meaning through contribution. Someone in the midst of creative expression might encounter connections that support their artistic development. It's not that the universe has different messages for different people. It's that your particular frequency of attention determines what aspects of the infinite web of connections you're able to tune into. Your interests, values, current challenges, and developmental needs all function like filters, highlighting certain patterns while rendering others invisible. This understanding places the responsibility for cultivating synchronicity squarely in your hands, but in an empowering rather than burdensome way. You don't have to wait for external validation or worry about whether you're spiritually advanced enough to receive guidance. You simply need to create the internal conditions that allow your natural perceptual abilities to function at their optimal level. The practices that support this aren't mysterious or esoteric. They're basic principles of mental and emotional hygiene, regular meditation or contemplation, spending time in nature, engaging in activities that bring you into present moment awareness, cultivating emotional regulation skills, maintaining physical health, and creating space for silence and stillness in your daily routine. As you become more skilled at maintaining these optimal internal conditions, you begin to notice that synchronicity becomes less dramatic and more consistent. Instead of waiting for big, obvious signs that feel like cosmic interventions, you start to perceive a constant stream of subtle guidance woven into the fabric of ordinary experience. A chance conversation that provides exactly the perspective you needed, a book that falls open to a relevant page, a series of small events that guide you toward an important realization. The guidance becomes more integrated into daily life rather than standing apart from it as special or unusual. This is the maturation of your relationship with synchronicity, from treating it as an external phenomenon that validates your specialness to recognizing it as a natural function of consciousness that becomes available as you learn to inhabit your own awareness more fully. You stop seeking signs and start becoming the kind of person who naturally perceives the meaningful patterns that emerge when any conscious being pays careful attention to the interconnected nature of existence. The sacred pause, learning to sustain the frequency of not knowing. There's a particular quality of consciousness that every wisdom tradition has recognized as essential for receiving genuine guidance, though they've called it by different names. The beginner's mind, the empty cup, the fertile void, the pregnant darkness before creation. In the context of synchronicity, this state could be called the sacred pause, that space between asking and receiving, between seeking and finding, between the ending of what was and the beginning of what's next. Most of us are deeply uncomfortable with this space. We've been trained to fill every gap with activity, every silence with words, every uncertainty with premature conclusions. The moment we ask a question, we immediately start generating potential answers. The instant we notice a problem, we begin strategizing solutions. We've lost the art of dwelling in the question itself, of allowing our inquiries to ripen in the fertile darkness of not knowing until authentic insight emerges naturally. But synchronicity requires this capacity for suspension, for holding space, without immediately collapsing it into meaning. The most profound synchronicities often emerge from periods where you've stopped trying to figure everything out with your rational mind and started trusting the intelligence that operates below. The threshold of conscious thought. It's like planting a seed and then having the patience to let it germinate in the dark soil, rather than digging it up every few days to check on its progress. This is perhaps the most challenging aspect of working consciously with synchronicity. In our current cultural moment, we live in an age of instant information, immediate gratification, and algorithmic prediction. We've been conditioned to expect answers on demand, guidance on schedule, and clear instructions for every situation. The idea of sitting with questions without immediately seeking answers triggers our cultural anxiety about efficiency and productivity. But the realm of synchronicity operates according to a different temporal logic, what mystics have called kairos rather than chronos, sacred time, rather than clock time. In kairos, things unfold according to their own inner necessity, rather than external deadlines. Seeds sprout when they're ready, not when you need them to. Insights arise when the conditions are right, not when your schedule demands clarity. Learning. To work with this rhythm requires developing what could be called spiritual patience, not the passive patience of resignation, but the active patience of trust. It's the willingness to remain available to guidance while releasing attachment to when and how that guidance might arrive. It's like being a good host who prepares for guests without knowing exactly when they'll arrive, maintaining readiness, without anxiety or expectation. This sacred pause isn't empty waiting, it's full presence to the moment as it is rather than as you wish it were or fear it might become. It's the difference between the nervous energy of seeking and the receptive stillness of availability. When your seeking, your attention is scattered toward potential futures and past disappointments. When you're available, your attention is gathered in the present moment, open to whatever wants to emerge. Many people report that their most significant synchronicities occur during or immediately after periods of what they initially experienced as spiritual dryness or emptiness. They describe going through phases where their usual practices felt flat, where their connection to guidance seemed severed, where they questioned everything they thought they knew about their path and purpose. These desert periods, while uncomfortable, often serve as preparation for a new level of understanding that couldn't have emerged without first clearing away outdated beliefs and expectations. The sacred pause also requires learning to distinguish between productive uncertainty and anxious rumination. Productive uncertainty is spacious and open. It holds questions, lightly remaining curious about possible answers without grasping for premature resolution. Anxious rumination is tight and repetitive. It circles around problems compulsively, trying to think its way to security rather than allowing solutions to emerge organically. One way to cultivate this quality of open uncertainty is through what could be called question meditation. Instead of trying to answer your questions through mental analysis, you practice holding them in awareness without immediately moving toward resolution. You might ask, "What is mine to do in this situation?" And then sit with that question, allowing it to rest in your consciousness like a stone dropped into still water, noticing what ripples emerge without forcing any particular response. This practice teaches you to befriend the unknown rather than treating it as a problem to be solved. It helps you recognize that not knowing isn't a deficiency in your understanding. It's a fertile condition for authentic insight to arise. Most of the important questions in life don't have answers that can be figured out through thinking. They have responses that emerge through allowing yourself to be lived by something larger than your personal will and preferences. The sacred pause also reveals itself in the space between recognizing a synchronicity and interpreting its meaning. There's often a moment of pure recognition, a sense that something significant has just occurred before the mind rushes in with explanations and applications. Learning to rest in that moment of recognition, without immediately converting it into information or instruction, allows the synchronicity to work on you at levels deeper than conceptual understanding. This is why many wisdom traditions emphasize the importance of sitting with teachings rather than immediately trying to apply them. The pause between receiving and acting allows the deeper implications to penetrate your being, to shift your understanding at levels that will naturally transform your behavior rather than requiring effortful implementation of new ideas. In practical terms, cultivating the sacred pause might mean taking time between major decisions, even when external pressures are pushing for immediate action. It might mean sitting with difficult emotions rather than immediately trying to fix or change them. It might mean allowing relationships to evolve organically rather than forcing them toward predetermined outcomes. The sacred pause is ultimately about trusting that you don't have to manage every aspect of your life through conscious control. It's about recognizing that there's an intelligence at work in your experience that's larger and wiser than your personal understanding, and that this intelligence can guide you more effectively when you create space for it to operate, rather than trying to direct its movements. This doesn't mean becoming passive or abdicting responsibility for your choices. It means learning to act from a place of inner stillness rather than reactive urgency, to respond to life from your center rather than from your surface anxieties and desires. It means developing the capacity to remain present and responsive while holding your plans and preferences lightly ready to adjust course when new information becomes available through the subtle channels of synchronistic guidance. The false spiritual emergency. When your need for signs becomes a new form of suffering. There's a particular kind of spiritual suffering that didn't exist before synchronicity became democratized and commodified. The anxiety that comes from feeling disconnected from cosmic guidance, the depression that sets in when the signs stop coming, the existential panic that arises when you start to doubt whether the universe actually cares about your personal journey. We've created a new category of spiritual emergency, the crisis of feeling cosmically ignored. This might be the most perverse transformation that's occurred in our relationship with synchronicity. What was once understood as occasional grace moments of meaningful connection that reminded you of your place in the larger web of existence, has become an expected service, a spiritual utility that we feel entitled to access on demand. When it's not available, we don't simply return to relying on our own wisdom and practical intelligence. We interpret its absence as evidence of our spiritual failure or cosmic abandonment. The symptoms of this new form of suffering are everywhere. In contemporary spiritual communities, people who spend hours analyzing why their synchronicities have decreased, who interpret every random event as potentially meaningful rather than risk missing a sign, who've developed what could be called cosmic ADHD, an inability to focus on ordinary tasks because they're constantly scanning for extraordinary communications. There's the person who can't make basic decisions without consulting angel numbers, who's paralyzed by the fear of moving forward without clear cosmic confirmation, who's developed a dependency on external validation that's even more debilitating than traditional forms of codependency, because at least human relationships offer the possibility of direct communication. At least you can ask your partner what they're thinking. You can't exactly call the universe and ask why it's been so quiet lately. This spiritual dependency creates a particularly insidious form of learned helplessness. Instead of developing confidence in their own judgment and intuitive knowing, people become increasingly reliant on synchronistic confirmation for every choice. They lose trust in their ability to navigate life from their own center, constantly seeking permission from cosmic forces to take actions that are clearly aligned with their values and circumstances. The irony is that this desperate need for signs often indicates exactly the opposite of what people think it means. They interpret their hunger for synchronicity as evidence of their spiritual sensitivity, their openness to divine guidance, their readiness to surrender to a higher power. But more often, it's evidence of their disconnection from their own inner authority, their lack of trust in their own wisdom, their unconscious belief that they're not capable of making good decisions without supernatural intervention. This is why the most spiritually mature people often report having fewer dramatic synchronicities, not more. As they develop confidence in their own inner guidance, as they learn to trust their intuition and make decisions from their authentic center, they become less dependent on external confirmation. They still notice meaningful connections when they occur, but they don't need them to function effectively in the world. The proliferation of synchronicity as a spiritual emergency also reflects our cultural inability to tolerate uncertainty and ambiguity. We live in an age that promises immediate answers to every question, instant solutions to every problem, clear guidance for every decision. The idea that some questions might not have answers, that some problems might need to be lived rather than solved, that some uncertainty might be essential for growth rather than an obstacle to it, these possibilities feel intolerable to minds that have been trained to expect constant information and control. But uncertainty isn't a problem to be solved through accumulating more signs. It's a condition to be inhabited with grace. The capacity to live comfortably with not knowing, to make decisions based on the best information available while remaining open to new data, to trust your own judgment while staying humble about the limits of your perspective. These are essential life skills that can't be developed through dependence on synchronistic guidance. The false spiritual emergency also reveals how we've confused intensity with significance, drama with meaning. We've been trained by entertainment culture to expect that important communications will be obvious, dramatic, impossible to miss. But the most significant guidance often comes through subtle shifts in perception, quiet moments of clarity, gentle nudges that could easily be overlooked if you're scanning for cosmic fireworks. This is why people often report that their most life-changing insights came through ordinary experiences. A conversation with a stranger, a passage in a book, a moment of silence in nature, rather than through dramatic synchronicities. The universe doesn't need to shout to get your attention if you're actually listening. The problem isn't that the guidance isn't there, it's that we've lost the ability to perceive it at the frequency where it naturally occurs. Breaking free from this false emergency requires a fundamental shift in how you understand your relationship with guidance. Instead of seeing yourself as a passive recipient of cosmic messages, you need to recognize yourself as an active participant in an ongoing conversation with life itself. Instead of waiting for the universe to tell you what to do, you need to trust that you already have access to the wisdom you need to navigate your current circumstances. This doesn't mean rejecting synchronicity or becoming cynical about meaningful connections. It means developing a more mature relationship with guidance, one that appreciates synchronistic experiences when they occur without becoming dependent on them for basic functioning. It means learning to distinguish between genuine openness to cosmic communication and spiritual anxiety disguised as receptivity. The cure for the false spiritual emergency is often surprisingly simple. Start making decisions based on practical wisdom, authentic values, and genuine care for yourself and others, regardless of whether you've received cosmic confirmation. Trust that if you're truly off course, life will provide feedback in the form of natural consequences, rather than cryptic symbols. Recognize that your ability to live with integrity and respond to circumstances with wisdom and compassion is itself a form of spiritual practice, regardless of how many meaningful coincidences you encounter along the way. Most importantly, remember that your worth and your connection to the larger mystery of existence isn't dependent on your ability to decode cosmic messages. You are part of the universe, not separate from it. You don't need its permission to live authentically, and you don't need its constant reassurance to trust that your life has meaning and purpose. The signs are beautiful when they come, but they're supplements to your own inner knowing, not substitutes for it. Integration. When you become the field where synchronicity manifests, after all the seeking and interpreting, all the waiting and wondering, all the excitement and disappointment that comes with trying to maintain a relationship with cosmic guidance, there comes a moment of recognition that changes everything. You realize that you are not separate from the field of consciousness in which synchronicity operates. You are not a receiver of cosmic messages, but a focal point through which the universe experiences itself subjectively. You are not waiting for signs from somewhere else. You are the place where meaning emerges from the intersection of inner and outer self and world, known and unknown. This shift in understanding marks the difference between spiritual adolescence and spiritual maturity. In the adolescent phase, you're primarily concerned with getting guidance, receiving signs, feeling special and chosen and connected to something larger than yourself. In the mature phase, you're concerned with becoming someone through whom guidance can flow naturally, becoming a clear enough instrument that the intelligence of life can express itself through your choices and responses without the need for constant external validation. This doesn't mean that synchronicities stop occurring. In fact, they often become more frequent and integrated into daily experience, but their quality changes. Instead of feeling like special deliveries from an external source, they feel like natural expressions of your alignment with your authentic path. Instead of surprising you with their meaningfulness, they feel like confirmation of connections you were already sensing at some level. Instead of telling you what to do, they reflect back to you what you already know in your depths. Carl Jung spent the latter part of his career exploring this understanding, recognizing that individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, naturally leads to increased synchronicity, not because you're receiving more cosmic attention, but because you're becoming more coherent as a person. When your conscious intentions align with your unconscious wisdom, when your actions reflect your authentic values, when you're living from your center rather than from your surface, reactions and adaptations, you naturally create the conditions that allow meaningful connections to emerge. This coherence is both psychological and energetic. Psychologically, it means that different aspects of your personality are working together rather than at cross purposes. You're not saying one thing while feeling another, not pursuing goals that contradict your deeper values, not trying to be someone you're not in order to gain acceptance or avoid rejection. This inner alignment creates what systems theorists call resonance, a harmonic frequency that tends to attract experiences and relationships that match your authentic vibration. Energetically, coherence means that your heart, mind, and body are operating in sync rather than in conflict. Your thoughts support your feelings. Your feelings inform your thoughts, and both are grounded in bodily wisdom that knows things your mental processes might miss. This integrated state creates what researchers studying heart-brain coherence call an optimal psychophysiological state, a condition of maximum receptivity and responsiveness that naturally perceives patterns and connections that remain invisible. 2. Fragmented consciousness. When you reach this state of integration, synchronicity becomes less about receiving guidance and more about participating consciously in the creative unfolding of your life. You begin to understand that your choices and intentions don't just respond to cosmic guidance, they help to generate it. Your authentic expression becomes part of the larger intelligence that's orchestrating meaningful connections throughout the web of existence. This is perhaps the most profound realization that comes with spiritual maturity. You discover that you're not separate from the intelligence you've been seeking guidance from. The wisdom you've been trying to access is not located somewhere outside yourself. It's the deeper layer of your own consciousness, the part of you that's never been separate from the source of all guidance and knowing. This understanding radically transforms your relationship with uncertainty and decision-making. Instead of waiting for external signs to tell you what to do, you learn to tune into the intelligence that's always available within your own being. Instead of seeking cosmic permission for your choices, you trust that when you're aligned with your authentic nature, your choices will naturally serve the larger good. Instead of treating life as something that happens to you, you recognize yourself as an active participant in the ongoing creation of reality. The practical result of this integration is a kind of effortless guidance that flows through ordinary consciousness, rather than requiring special states or dramatic synchronicities. You find yourself knowing what to say in conversations without planning your words, making decisions that serve your development, without analyzing all the options, being drawn toward people and opportunities that support your growth, without consciously seeking them out. This doesn't mean you become passive or stop thinking and planning. It means that your thinking and planning arise from a deeper source of knowing, rather than from anxiety and control. You use your rational mind as a tool for implementing guidance, rather than as the primary source of that guidance. You make practical preparations for your goals while remaining open to having those goals evolve as new information becomes available through lived experience. Living from this integrated state also means that you become a source of synchronicity for others, rather than just a recipient of it. Your presence becomes a catalyst for meaningful connections, not because you're trying to create them, but because your alignment with your authentic nature naturally creates coherence in your environment. People find themselves having unexpected insights in your presence, discovering new perspectives through conversations with you, encountering opportunities that seem to arise from your connections and introductions. This is what Jung meant when he spoke about becoming individuated, not isolated or self-centered, but integrated in such a way that your personal development serves the collective good. When you're truly yourself, you naturally contribute to the evolution of consciousness in ways that extend far beyond your personal sphere of influence. Your authentic expression becomes part of the larger field of intelligence that's guiding the development of human awareness itself. The final paradox of this integration is that as you become more capable of generating synchronicity, you become less attached to it. You appreciate meaningful connections when they occur, but you don't need them to feel connected to life. You notice signs and patterns, but you don't depend on them for basic guidance. You remain open to cosmic communication, but you're not waiting for it to live authentically and purposefully. You realize that the greatest synchronicity is the simple fact that you exist at all, that consciousness has organized itself into the particular pattern that you are, that the universe has become capable of experiencing itself through your unique perspective, that meaning and purpose are not things you have to discover or deserve, but expressions of the fundamental nature of existence itself. From this recognition, every moment becomes potentially sacred. Every choice becomes an opportunity for conscious participation, and in that moment, you realize that the true miracle isn't in the rare lightning flashes of obvious meaning, but in the steady hum of existence quietly singing its own song, through every breath, every thought, every leaf trembling in a breeze you didn't call. You've spent so long tracking the fireworks that you forgot the sunrise was happening all along. You've been waiting for the universe to drop breadcrumbs, when the forest floor beneath your feet has been carpeted with them, so many that you stumbled over your own feet in your hurry to find a grand gesture. In the stillness that follows this recognition, you begin to discover that guidance isn't a treasure, buried somewhere out there. It's the subtle thread weaving through the fabric of your life, visible only when you stop yanking on it so hard. It's in the way your heart skips a beat when you make a choice aligned with your true values. It's in the gentle tug toward relationships that challenge and nourish you simultaneously. It's in the quiet satisfaction that lingers after you've spoken an uncomfortable truth to someone you love. These are the synchronistic moments that no one will ever hashtag or post about, yet they resonate far deeper than any viral coincidence ever could. When you finally rest in this awareness, you learn that there is no coach, no cosmic vending machine, no separate divine force that you need to impress or appease. You are the conduit. Your every thought, feeling, and action is the lit match that ignites possibility. The world around you mirrors back the state of your own consciousness, not because it's a puppet on some celestial stage, but because it literally is you. Your interior, made visible, your unconscious given form. So you begin to stop apologizing for your authentic impulses. You stop filtering your curiosities through the lens of what seems spiritual enough or high vibe. You allow yourself to be drawn toward people and experiences that stir your blood, even if they scare the living daylights out of your neat, polite persona. You give yourself permission to laugh uproariously at the absurdity of it all, to cry messy tears when what was familiar falls away, and to celebrate every step forward, no matter how small. In this living laboratory, you experiment with radical honesty, saying what you mean, meaning what you say, and holding the space for the inevitable fallout when old stories meet new truths. You take risks that feel outrageously disproportionate to your current circumstances. You start that creative project you've been daydreaming about. You tell someone you love them without knowing how they'll respond. You walk away from a job that pays well but costs your soul. With each act of self-trust, you reinforce your nervous system's new operating system, one that balances courage with compassion, discernment with surrender, purpose with play. And amid these experiments, you become a student of hidden curriculum, the unspoken lessons that arrive through friction rather than fireworks. You notice that disappointment, rejection, even failure contain within them the seeds of your next evolution. You learn to ask not, "Why is this happening to me?" but "What is this here to teach me?" And as you pose that question with genuine curiosity rather than spiritual resignation, you find answers emerging in your dreams, in passing conversations, in the gentle synchronicities of language. The right book landing in your hands, the exact lyric playing in the cafe at the moment your heart needs it. The stranger whose story pierces through your defenses and reminds you that confusion is a universal rite of passage. With time, the edges between inner and outer begin to blur. You feel as if every moment of your life, mundane or mystical, was designed to guide you home to yourself. The heartbreak that once felt like cosmic proof of your unworthiness now reads like a chapter in your own rite of passage. The small acts of kindness that once seemed random now coalesce into a pattern of grace, one so intricate and intimate that you wonder whether your life has been less a series of accidents than a masterpiece. Of love you are only just now learning to behold. And in this unfolding you come to understand what Carl Jung meant when he spoke of consciousness as a garden. You cannot simply will a seed to sprout. You must till the soil of your being, enrich it with the humus of honest inquiry, tend it with the waters of self-compassion and trust that life's mysterious alchemy will bring forth its own flowers in their own time. The practice isn't about forcing growth, it's about creating the conditions where growth is inevitable. There will still be nights when the mind races, when the silence feels like a void rather than a cradle, when you wonder if the signals died in transit. But by then you know how to listen differently. You recognize that the deepest guidance often arrives not as lightning, but as a slow dawn, a gradual warming of your awareness that reshapes your perception long before it reshapes your circumstances. You know how to sit in the sacred pause without turning it into therapy, without slipping into panic, without abandoning yourself to the illusion that you've lost your way. You trust that the path is never truly lost, only waiting for you to notice the subtle markers you've been overlooking, In the end, you don't manifest a perfect life. You manifest yourself, layer by layer, shadow by beloved shadow, until the distance between who you are and how you live is so narrow that everything becomes a reflection rather than a distraction. Synchronicity ceases to be an event and becomes a lens inviting you to see the sacred geometry in the arbitrary, the divine emergence in the everyday, the hand of your own soul gently sculpting your journey. And as you recognize this, you realize there was never a cosmic vending machine, never a private hotline to some external deity. There was only you, the field of consciousness becoming aware of itself moment by moment through the living kaleidoscope of your experience. So rest now, dear traveler. Lay down your seeker's staff, silence the interior narrator, and simply be present with the vast mystery you already embody. Let the quiet miracles of ordinary life wash over you with the same wonder you once reserved for the grandest coincidences. In this simple, continuous practice of waking up fully to your own aliveness, you discover the true truth about synchronicity. It was always you listening to the whisper of your own being calling you home.